Let's start. So thank you for joining, people still logging in. Great to have fantastic speakers today with me. My name is Emese van Maanen. I'm from the ProTerra Foundation. We'll start today with some housekeeping rules and a brief introduction on the activities of ProTerra, and then we'll move to ISEAL. They will represent Jess will talk about chain of custody models, the definitions, and their guidance on this. After that, I will move from the more broadened scope on general and sustainability schemes to the ProTerra specific chain of models, chain of custody models, and what that means. And we have just launched this afternoon our new guidance, after which Emma will, from FoodChain ID, explain more how the practical implementation works and the verification on site, how auditors practically verify also these claims, and that will be really a fantastic opportunity to also ask questions at the end after all the presentation. You will be all put on mute. As said, at the end we do have some time for questions, so start already thinking about those during the presentations. The webinar will be recorded, and after we have finished, the recording and the slides will be sent out to the registered participants. So don't worry if you missed this, or your colleagues, feel free to also share the recording afterwards. So briefly about the ProTerra Foundation, for those who don't know us, we work globally on sustainable supply chains, supporting our members, more than 170 members in almost 50 countries, to make their daily operations and business practices more sustainable, supporting it through the protection of biodiversity, switching to sustainable raw material production in the feed and food supply chains, conserving natural resources, and supporting and respecting local communities and workers' rights. How do we do that? We are mainly known for our standards, using those more than 2 decades now. Originally started with the ProTerra Foundation standard, but today operating in its 5th version, which is a non-GMO standard, and locally supporting stakeholders also with local interpretations, such as for Europe, China, or the smallholders one that is used for family farms all over the globe. In addition to that, we have a monitoring and verification standard, also multi-crop, working on management system improvement and making sure that companies sourcing have a robust system and sourcing policies in place. And we have also add-on modules such as the regenerative agricultural one that companies can use and address their clients' needs in a better way. We do that, as mentioned, for food and feed supply chains all over the world. And here you can see also visually where we operate with also colleagues all over the world. More specifically, the figures, just for those that are interested, can look into the details after the webinar. Our biggest work is focusing on soy and sugarcane, certifying more than 2 million tons physically on soybeans under the ProTerra standard, mainly in South America and European countries and India, and for sugarcane, Asia and South America, for changing volumes every year in 2025, exceeding 40 million tons of raw material. And now I'm coming to our topic of today, chain of custody models and traceability, key elements when it comes to sustainability. Why is this important at all? Companies are required to know more and more about their supply chain. And you don't know that without having some kind of traceability in your system, without knowing where your raw materials come from. There is no possibility or way to identify risk in the supply chain, be it on land rights, social, labor condition, land conflicts, illegal pesticide use, or GMO presence. We just had a couple of weeks ago, again, shipments blocked, for example, from Argentina, where not allowed GMOs were defined and blocked in the Netherlands. Shipments were from Argentina and Brazil, and you can imagine what that means when you have many thousands of tons blocked and waiting for a decision from the authorities. So it's important not only from financially, but also from strategic and reputational point of view to know your risk and to work together with your supply chain. In addition to that, a lot of discussions later around, of course, also the legislative framework, more and more directive regulations are around sustainability, where the basis in many cases is traceability and due diligence within the supply chains to comply with these, such as the EU EUDR or others. So I'm delighted to have our speakers today. We're starting with ISEAL. Jess will explain us more how they define chain of custody models, their guidance, and how they support also sustainability systems in implementing these.
Thanks, Emese,
Yes,
and
the
yes,
word is yours.
thanks for having us here today. So I'm Jess. I'm a senior coordinator at ISEAL working on traceability and chain of custody. And I'll be presenting today on ISEAL's revised chain of custody guidance that we published last year in July. I'm also joined by my colleague Josh Taylor. He's also on the call, and he's ISEAL's traceability manager and will be joining us later on for the discussion. But first off, what is ISEAL? So for those of you who aren't so familiar with us, I'll start with a quick overview. We see ourselves as having sort of two main roles. And the first is that we're the global reference on good practice for credible sustainability systems. And we have two flagship resources. So we have the ISEAL credibility principles. These help defining sort of the core values of credible and effective sustainability systems. And we have 10 of these principles. And then we also have the ISEAL Code of Good Practice, which is a globally recognized framework, and it defines practice for effective and credible sustainability systems. And the code basically operationalizes those credibility principles. And our second role is that we're a membership organization, and we convene a membership of 47 community members. And all of our members, they have a shared commitment to making a real difference and to continuous improvement. And 20 of our members are also code compliant, and that basically means that they adhere to the ISEAL code by meeting independent evaluation requirements. And on the next slide, you'll be able to see a full list of our members. You can see they're from a wide spread of sectors, commodities, different services, and you can see the full breakdown with descriptions of our community members and code compliance status on the website. But that's who we are at ISEAL, so now we can take a look at why we're having this conversation today. So what's driving the interest of chain of custody? There's been sort of a rapidly growing interest over recent years. And along with this comes a lot of confusion about what it actually means and how it works, and also what chain of custody is used for. So originally, chain of custody came from the legal world, and it was basically used to protect the integrity of evidence. It's also long been used in things like in product and also in food safety to ensure integrity. And in the context of sustainability certification, chain of custody became central to product claims because it determines what can credibly be said about a certified or verified product. And so that's why ISEAL first developed chain of custody guidance back in 2016 as a reference to our claims good practice guidance. But today, chain of custody, it goes far beyond just product claims. We're also seeing it increasingly referenced across due diligence regulations, most notably in the context of EUDR, but also in sort of corporate responsible sourcing policies, in external reporting frameworks. And there's also been an interest in chain of custody as a means for transferring attributes, particularly GHG emissions, through the supply chain. So GHGP, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they've also been exploring using chain of custody approaches for tracking emissions reductions and removals, including what models might qualify as sort of physical traceability for accounting and reporting purposes. Again, SBTI have also been using chain of custody language in their corporate net zero standard in the new draft for the version 2. And with all of this growing attention, it's positive, but it also means that there's a lot of inconsistency when different sectors are talking about chain of custody and talking about it meaning different things. So that's why we really updated our chain of custody guidance to try and bring some clarity and some consistency, a bit of shared language across all of these different use cases. So we launched the guidance. I mean, the first sort of guidance was published back in 2016. We can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. And it was published as sort of a go-to public resource for stakeholders that are looking to understand chain of custody systems and chain of custody terminology. But a lot has changed since then. So last year we published a revised version of the guidance, and it was following getting various bits of input from a wide range of stakeholders. We held a public consultation, and we also held an expert working group where we had representatives from across lots of different sectors. And the guidance basically sets out some clearer definitions. There's an overview of key features of credible chain of custody systems, and also guidance on when the different chain of custody models are appropriate. And the guidance also has a lot of visuals that can help with understanding, and it's part of a broader suite of updates that's linked to the introduction of the revised Code of Good Practice. So we can pop a link in the chat now or later, just in case you want to explore our chain of custody guidance a little bit more. But let's dive into what chain of custody is. So our guidance defines chain of custody as a means by which inputs, outputs, and associated attributes are transferred, monitored, and controlled as they move forwards through each step in the supply chain. And so the chain of custody enables the transfer and validation of attributes associated with activities and entities included in a sustainability system. They also control the movement, handling, and processing of materials within and between approved or certified business entities, and also forms the basis for any claims that can be made about an approved or certified product. So that's what chain of custody is. And in contrast, when we talk about traceability, if we move to the next slide, it's often an exercise in looking backwards. And so we refer to traceability as the ability to track and verify the history and the location of a materials movement through defined stages of production, processing, and distribution. And it's really important that we distinguish traceability from chain of custody, as the two are often conflated. And so I'm going to highlight a few key differences that we note in our guidance. The first is previous slide, thanks. First is the direction in which material is tracked. So chain of custody is a forward material tool, and this goes from production through manufacturing, distribution, and consumption. And then traceability systems, they can still be material forward, but they can also be product backwards, and they can rely on that historical data. Another difference is supply chain participation. So chain of custody really requires active engagement from different supply chain actors. The supply chain actors are known, and they're also participating in checks and in verification. Whereas in traceability systems, they can exist with more sort of limited or indirect supply chain involvement. And then the next difference is what's being tracked and how it's being controlled. So chain of custody is really used to track material volumes and their associated attributes, with controls in place for volume reconciliation. So you can't sell on more than you've purchased. Whereas traceability systems, they can handle sort of a much broader range of data, but they don't necessarily require that volume reconciliation to work. And then finally, in terms of differences, we would look at verification. So chain of custody systems, they require verification. This is likely audits to make sure that it's being implemented successfully. Whereas a traceability system, it may or may not include that formal verification. And so the revised guidance also provides detail on what system elements sustainability systems should have in place for a well-functioning chain of custody system. So if we go to the next slide. Thank you. So you have your normative requirements. This is your chain of custody standard. There's also a strong emphasis on the need for monitoring and verification of the chain of custody. You also need a means of identifying and controlling sites. So controlling who's participating in the chain of custody to make sure that they're following the rules and tracking the attributes. And then there's also this growing need to use a centralized volume tracking and reconciliation system to track the volumes within and between entities who are participating in the chain of custody. And so if we go to the next slide, these are the 6 models that our guidance covers in detail. And I'll briefly run through the different models and also maybe how we might group them. But just conscious of time, you can feel free to sort of visit the guidance on our website, and also you can ask us any questions in the discussion. But yeah, I'll start off with the first 2 models, so identity preservation and segregation. And these 2 models, they don't allow for the mixing of certified and non-certified material. So in an identity preservation model, you have material from different origins, which are kept separate from other sources, whether they're certified or not. So because it requires a really high level of control, it's used when the nature and the material and the supply chain basically allow for this level of separation. And because of that high level of control, it allows us to make these single origin claims. So you can say it contains certified material from a particular source. And segregation, it also doesn't allow mixing of certified and non-certified material, but instead it does allow mixing of certified streams. So you still need enough certified material to justify having separate storage, having separate processing, and separate transportation to the non-certified material, but you're not required to keep the certified material from separate of different origins of certified material. I've said certified material too many times now. So for claims, basically for segregation, rather than saying from a single known origin, you can just say that it originates from certified sources. And for both of those models, there's a physical relationship between the certified attribute and also the material. So yeah, both use proportional attribution and allocation. There's more on this in the guidance, but the key thing being that this is then different to what we see in, say, a mass balance model. And so then we move to our mixed models, which are the ones in the middle here. And they allow for the mixing of certified and non-certified materials. So with a controlled blending model, it also tracks that physical relationship because the certified material is being mixed according to this known criteria with non-certified material. So it basically results in a known proportion of certified material in that output. And so it still requires a high level of control because you need to be accurately tracking that percentage of certified content. But it does mean that you can claim that percentage of certified content in the output. So you might be able to say contains 60% of soy from certified sources. Whereas mass balance, it also allows the mixing of certified and non-certified, but it does allow for non-proportional attribution of certified volumes to the corresponding outputs. So, for instance, if you had 100 units of if you had 100 units as your output, where for controlled blending, where we had 60% of certified content spread across all 100 sources, 100 units, here you might sell on 60 units of certified product and then 40 of non-certified product because you're not tracking the percentage anymore. And so instead of this physical relationship, we say that it maintains physical connectivity between the certified attribute and the material. And that's because there could be certified material in the product source as mass balance, but we really can't guarantee it. And so we use this model when it's not feasible to maintain that physical relationship between the material and the specified characteristics. The only thing is, if you're using a mass balance model, you can't imply that the product comes from a certified source or that it contains the certified material. Instead, you can just say it supports the production of, and then supports the production of this sustainable or certified soy. And then the next model that we have is a variation of mass balance, which is controlled mass balance, where all input material entering the system has specific attributes. So, for example, all material in the system, whether it's certified or not, is going to be compliant with a set of minimum legal or sustainability characteristics. And the non-compliant material is kept separate and it never enters the mass balance stream. And so this emerged in response to some regulations like EUDR that require control on all of the material that's entering the supply chain, not just the certified proportion. And because of these additional controls on non-certified material in the system, controlled mass balance can be used to support controlled sourcing and also the compliance of physical materials. So along with identity preservation and segregation, they all have that little icon that you can see in the top right-hand corner of each of the boxes. And that's another way that you can group the models. And just lastly, I'm going to really briefly mention book and claim, which is where certified volumes are completely dissociated from the physical material, which means that there's a separation of the certified attribute from the product. So there's no physical relationship or connectivity between the material and the attribute. And then very briefly, just to show a few visuals. So the next slide, these are our non-mixing models. This is identity preservation and segregation. And as you can see, identity preservation shows the separation of the different origins, no matter if it's certified or not. Whereas segregation shows the separation of certified and non-certified and does allow for the mixing of certified material. And then the next slide, here are our two core mixing models. So we have controlled blending, which still maintains that physical relationship because it's tracking a percentage of the content in the output. And then for mass balance, you can see the non-proportional attribution of certified volumes in the output, where instead we're just selling 48 units, which are sold on with the claim, and then 32 are just sold as non-certified. And then finally, just briefly showing how this differs to the controlled mass balance model, where there are additional controls to ensure that there's no non-compliant material in the system. So the non-compliant material never enters the system. And I will wrap up there. A bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm not sure if I've run over, but thanks for inviting us. And if there are any questions, we can answer these in the Q&A later on.
Lovely.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jess. That gave us a great introduction, setting the scene and explaining chain of custody models and how it differs from traceability. I will explain a bit more about how ProTerra uses in the sustainability standards the chain of custody models. Being an ISEAL member, we do use a lot and have already integrated in our systems and also in the guidance is a lot of what ISEAL has published and advises sustainability schemes to do. We just have launched this afternoon a new guidance, so I added the link. Please feel free to download it after the webinar and learn more also about the details, how we use it and what chain of custody models there are under the ProTerra systems. But very briefly, not to repeat what Jess has said, also under the ProTerra standards, we have two strategies that are adopted to minimize the risk of non-sustainable practices within the supply chain. And these include traceability and chain of custody as the basis. And also in the case of ProTerra, we use the definition that Jess has mentioned. So traceability does refer to the ability to track and verify the history and location of materials movement through defined stages of production, processing, and distribution, while chain of custody refers to documented trail that records the sequence of custody, control, and transfer of materials. This is important when it comes to evidence of ownership of the materials, and it permits also tracing back their physical movement. These chain of custody models do apply to all levels, also under the ProTerra standard. Why is this important? This is important also because under any kind of level certification, be it agricultural production, be it storage, trade, processing, retail, these are the models that can be used and will be also verified during an audit. And the audit secrets will be then explained later on by Emma. But documentation and assurance are key elements in maintaining and building trust, credibility, supporting the compliance as well, and reduce the risk of fraud or mislabeling, which is also a very current topic and discussion, a very hot topic in the European Union and other countries because of new claims and legislation around the claims, what is allowed to be used and not, in order to avoid greenwashing. Also towards the consumer and within systems. Just a few examples. Okay, what do we actually mean in this case in the agriculture supply chains? It's really the chain of custody goes through from the farm, be it like a soy farm for first processor or a storage. Then again, it may be exported and processed again. And many stages, it's a very complex supply chain usually till we get to the retail level. And it's also important for the supply chain actors in order to have claims and have the certification attributes going along the chain from supply chain actor to actor. The ProTerra standards fall under a physical chain of custody scheme that involve the production of sustainable commodities, which then flow into companies' direct supply chain. So what does that mean? That means that we only work with physical supply chains and physical chain of custody models. So we don't have a trading platform. No book and claim can be used under the ProTerra system. We work with less models than has been presented, but very similarly, identity preserve, segregation, and mass balance. What do these mean under our system? So practically, the identity preserve is really a batch that is a specific product, and it is separated from all other batches along the supply chain as long as it has an identity preserved chain of custody model. This in the commodity trade and in the case of, for example, sugarcane or soy is not really used, hardly seen, or at the beginning, very beginning of the chain, yes, and then it may also move to segregation. What does segregation mean in our case? It is very similar to what has been presented to Jess, that many different batches, for example, IP or other batches can be mixed, but all of them have to be certified. So the segregation definition in this case is that only ProTerra or certified or MRV verified volumes and products can be mixed with each other. To avoid misunderstanding, ProTerra certified cannot be mixed with MRV verified. It is really always standard specific, but it has to be then kept segregated from non-certified or non-verified products. That's important because to maintain this, the segregation of the system has to be guaranteed throughout the supply chain or until the receipt and handing over to the next operator in the supply chain. With the mass balance model, under the ProTerra system, we use a so-called, we call it a verified mass balance, which is that non-certified volumes can be mixed with certified volumes. However, the non-certified volumes have to fulfill certain criteria. What is this? This is that it has to be in some way verified that it's free from illegal pesticide or residues. It does respect also the guidance and the limits and the criteria under the ProTerra standard from pesticides. It's free from forced or child labor, deforestation with the cutoff date defined in the standard. And in the case of ProTerra standard, which is a GMO, free standard, also free from GMOs. This is, so as I mentioned, this is, as we call it, a verified mass balance, allowing then to mix certified with non-certified. However, the non-certified parts volumes have to have certain criteria that they fulfill. And what you typically see also in the different COC models, the chain of custody models, that actors may imply also and do also imply different levels of control and documentation around product origin. In the case of IP, it is the system that requires the most control and mass balance the least. And it's important that we keep this hierarchy so we can move from IOP towards mass balance, but not the other way around, because this ensures that claims made on products or documentation are also consistent with the physical or accounted flow or certified materials, and that buyers of certified materials know precisely which model applies. And because of this, an organization must know what chain of models is used by also the suppliers in its incoming materials. And it's also crucial to understand your customers' requirements. And also practical example for mass balance. In this case, if we have a mass balance, because I added here an example of this because this is where we receive the most questions around. Exactly, if we would have 5,000 tons of soybeans compliant under the ProTerra standard and are certified, mixed with 5,000 tons of soybeans that are non-certified, however, fulfill the basic verification requirements that I just shown in the previous slide. At the end, after considering and taking into account conversion rates and losses, we would have more or less 4,000 tons of soy meal and 1,000 tons of soy oil coming out of the processing unit that can be sold as certified. So that can keep the certification attribute, and the rest, the remaining volumes, cannot be declared. And this will be in detail then verified during an audit. Emma will explain the details. And an important and special kind of specific case is benchmarking. We work a lot with benchmarks, mutual recognitions, or unilateral recognitions under the ProTerra system in order to also reduce the burden when it comes to different systems and different audits, different certification schemes that are used by, for example, one organization. So we try to also respect and take into account the work that has been already done. We do a independent benchmark and publish the results on the website. All of them that are approved by the schemes involved are published on our website and can be downloaded. And some of them have automatic recognition. Some of them, most cases, we have a so-called gap list that is published as well, that can be used to identify which gaps have to be addressed during an audit, to also acknowledge those volumes as ProTerra certified and equivalent. So, for example, in case of ISCC, there's a list of gaps published on a website. And if you take ProTerra certified volumes 5,000 tons of ISCC, that is, without making here positive sound for them, and having those gaps that are required, having them addressed, and they pass that verification process, can be then considered also as ProTerra equivalent. So it would mean on paper that we have 10,000 tons after that process. And the output would accordingly also be calculated. So the 5,000 tons that positively benchmarked will be then considered as ProTerra certified, giving a total of 10,000 tons equivalent in the output side as well, considering as well, of course, here as the conversion rate and losses that happen during the processing. These are all explained also in detail in the guidance, and I think it's important to know, and I also added here the link where all the results list, gap list, and methodology can be then found on our website. And this brings me to the practical side, and I think that's a great addition to understand really what an auditor does. How does that work in practice? And we invite and are delighted to have Emma Best with us today from FoodChain ID, who will explain more about the practical implementation and verification work they do every day. Emma, the floor is yours.
Lovely, thank you, Emese. So this afternoon, I want to take you on a journey. Really, we're going to start with Ronaldo, who has been asked to implement ProTerra certification for his crushing plant. So we're going to explore Ronaldo's journey a little bit, what he needs to do to achieve the certification. We're also going to look at the rest of the supply chain as well, and explore the process all the way through to finished product, chocolate, in our case, and just show how the different products move throughout the supply chain, and thinking about the different chain of custody models, and the different actors as well in the supply chain and what they need to be able to demonstrate. So, meet Ronaldo. He's the quality manager of a soybean crushing plant, and over the past year, his customers have started to ask more and more questions about sustainability, about traceability, and the organisation's preparedness for EUDR. So his company needs to not only demonstrate where their materials are coming from, but also how they're managed throughout the supply chain. So Ronaldo has been asked to achieve ProTerra certification for his business. So actually now it's no longer just about product quality, but it's about customers, and those customers are expecting transparency. Retailers are expecting evidence and being able to prove where products come from and where the claims are substantiated. Regulators are expecting due diligence, and sustainability claims need to be supported by credible systems. So Ronaldo quickly realizes that actually this journey is not simply about obtaining certification and about the day of the audit, but it requires the company to build traceability, transparency, and an auditable supply chain from the farm to the final product as it's leaving the crushing plant. Move on to the next slide. So Ronaldo gets together a multidisciplinary team. So members from the procurement department, the operations, the agricultural support team, and of course his commercial team as well, to kind of understand what chain of custody model is going to best fit the business, with consideration obviously to the model that is required by the customers. So after reviewing those customer expectations, supplier capability, and their operational practicality, the company decides to implement the segregated model. So this requires segregation of certified material, non-certified material throughout the storage, the transport, and the processing. So materials are required to be maintained physically segregated. So on the next slide, we have an explanation of the segregated model. This is picked up from the guidance document and just expands on that a little bit further. So Ronaldo's busy mapping his supply chain, and he's identified that some of his suppliers are already certified to one of the benchmark recognised schemes. So in this case, it's FSA. Those suppliers are still declared as part of the supply chain, and their certification status would be reviewed during the audit process. So that means making sure that those suppliers are certified, and that can be demonstrated. However, because they already hold the benchmark certification, they don't need to be included in the ProTerra sampling approach. It will be looked at from a management system perspective, and that allows the certification body to focus their verification on those that are not certified. So FSA Silver is fully benchmarked and doesn't require any additional effort, whereas Emese just mentioned that some of the schemes might have gaps, and those gaps are included in the checklists that are available on the ProTerra website. So you can pick those up from the website, look at those gaps, and make sure that the supply chain is plugging those gaps and has additional systems in place. So basically then what we need to look at is while these certified materials can be mixed together, so ProTerra verified farms material plus the FSA material, they must remain physically separated from non-certified material throughout the storage, transport and processing. So this is important because the selected chain of custody model is segregation. The businesses must therefore maintain clear controls to ensure that certified and non-certified products cannot become commingled. The company must also maintain documentation showing the origin of each certified lot, the certification status of the suppliers, which lot had been combined, and how traceability was maintained throughout the process. So that comes back to the source and documentation around the origin, keeping it physically segregated, mixing of certified products. So if you look in the slide there, you can see that Lot A is ProTerra verified material, Lot B is FSA. So those can be mixed together to produce a new Lot C. Which is certified product that is then going into the crushing plant. So thinking about the preparation for the audit, on the next slide, we see here Ronaldo busy completing his application form for certification. So now the real work begins. So Ronaldo needs to start developing and organising the company's procedures, the records, the systems that are required to support certification. So this includes supply approval and due diligence checks, traceability records and documentation, the process for input and output reconciliation, considering as well the conversion factors, the chain of custody procedures and the work instructions, making sure that people are trained and competent in the tasks that are required to support these systems, and internal audits as well. So Ronaldo is going to use the checklists that have been provided in preparation for the audit to conduct that gap analysis. So he's going to use the level 3 checklist, which is the checklist for industrial processing, making sure that the crushing plant is compliant with all of the requirements. Level 1 checklist. So Ronaldo and the agricultural support team is going to sample the agricultural production farms and make sure that they are complying with the requirements of level 1 in the standard, and also a sample of the agricultural collectors as well, making sure that they're complying with the level 2 requirements, and that the traceability and the chain of custody can be maintained throughout all stages. So being happy that all of that's done, the gaps are plugged and they're ready for the audit. Ronaldo submits his application form to the certification body, and on his application form he's declaring the level 1 suppliers, so the farms that are going to be supplying the beans. He explains how those beans move through the different collection points, all the way through to the crushing plant. And Ronaldo's already signed up as the plant is already signed up as a member of the ProTerra Foundation. So that membership is in place, and that's a prerequisite for certification. So at this stage, Ronaldo does realise that the focus is on not just passing the audit, but it's actually about building confidence that the system can consistently maintain the traceability and support credible sustainability claims. So moving here on to the day of the audit and what needs to happen. I'm going to focus on obviously the crushing plant and how it's audited to the level 3 requirements of the standard. And in this case, the crushing plant is the economic operator. So that means that the crushing plant will be the one that achieves the certification, but that also includes the supply chain, which means the collectors and the farms. So we're focusing here on principle 10, which is traceability and chain of custody. But of course, all of the other requirements in the checklist do need to be met as well. So when the auditor arrives, they're going to undertake the facility inspection. So that means that they're going to walk the process, looking at how the materials move through the facility. So from raw material intake all the way through to dispatch of the finished products from the site. They're going to be assessing deeply the segregation controls. So if they're managing certified material and uncertified material, how does that physical segregation look all the way through the production process? Going to be reviewing the production controls, which includes reviewing procedures, cleaning, scheduling, and auditor competency along the way. The ability of operator competency, the ability of the operator to be able to explain the standard. A traceability challenge is going to be undertaken as well. So that's a test of whether the materials can be traced forwards and backwards throughout the system. And then looking at the volume reconciliation as well. So finally, they verify that the certified output volumes do not exceed the input volumes after accounting for any yields and losses. So in addition to the audit of the crushing plant, the auditor would also conduct verification audits against the level 1 requirements of agricultural production. So that's the growing of the soybeans. And level 2 verification then of the agricultural collectors, the storage, and assess the traceability and segregation practices, ensuring that the selected chain of custody model can be achieved at all stages. And additionally, the auditor is also looking at the requirements in relation to human rights, good labour practices, workplace health and safety, equal opportunities, and in particular preventing child labour and forced labour. Also looking at the good agricultural practices regarding soil fertility, water management, and continuous efforts to reduce the use of fertilisers and pesticides. And then thinking about deforestation as well, and biodiversity, and also non-GMO controls as well. So sampling of the core suppliers is carried out in accordance with the ProTerra audit protocol. So the audit protocol details the size of the supply chain and how many audits need to be conducted of the core suppliers that are feeding into the economic operator to be certified. So in addition to the traceability and the chain of custody controls, the supply chain also needs to support non-GMO verification requirements. So testing is carried out through the different stages of the supply chain. It begins with the incoming soybeans and continuing then through storage, processing, and to the finished products. And at the agricultural crushing stages, GMO testing is a lot more straightforward because the soybeans still contain that detectable DNA and protein. As soybeans become more refined, then the testing becomes increasingly challenging. So for example, soybean meal can still typically be tested effectively. Crude soybean oil becomes more difficult, and highly refined products very, very difficult as there is little or no remaining detectable DNA. So this means that laboratory testing alone cannot always verify non-GMO status for the highly processed products. And this is why robust traceability, segregation, and chain of custody systems become critically important. The certification system does rely both on analytical testing where it's appropriate and documented supply chain controls to maintain confidence in the integrity of that non-GMO claim. So during the audit process, the certification body will review the GMO testing programs, sampling procedures, laboratory results, supplier declarations, segregation controls, and traceability records. And together, these controls help to ensure that non-GMO claims remain credible from farm all the way through to the consumer product. So just thinking, about 100,000 metric tons of soybeans entering the crushing plant. So these are just figures for illustrative processes, but we're just thinking about the journey of the product here. So the crushing processes segregates the soybeans into 3 primary output streams. So we're going to look at soybean meals, soy hulls, and crude soybean oil. So crushing, typically around 75% becomes soybean meal. This is a high protein meal, is used for animal feed or aquaculture feed. So in the diagram here, you can see that soybean meal is being supplied to Ronaldo's aquaculture feed producers. Around 5% of the hulls are also commonly used in animal feed as well. So in the diagram here, we've got those hulls going into cattle feed manufacture. It provides essential fibre for ruminant digestion and livestock health. And then we're going to follow the soybean oil in this case study through to the refining. So approximately 20% becomes crude oil, which then, as we said, will move through into refining. And this is where we'll pick up the next slide. But what's important here is that Ronaldo's customers for cattle feed and for aquaculture feed are purchasing the soybean hulls and soybean meal with a segregated chain of custody claim on them. So they can kind of move that forward through their systems. Conversion factors are really important here. Okay, so where conversion factors define expected yields between the input materials and the resultant output materials. So these factors allow the business and the auditor to calculate the maximum amount of certified product that could logically be produced. So if you think about the refining yields, and we'll see this in a minute, around 98 in this example, 98 to 98.5% becomes soybean oil, and from that then becomes 1 to 2% of soy lecithin. So the remaining percentage represents some production processing loss or impurities that are moved during the refining process. Why is this important? So the purpose of the calculations is to ensure the integrity of the sustainability claim. The business must be able to demonstrate that certified output volumes never exceed the input volumes after accounting for yields, losses, and processing transformations. So transition into volume reconciliation. The information then feeds directly into the volume reconciliation process. And certified economic operators will be asked to provide information for verification during the audit. So that means that there needs to be clear documentation on opening stock, the raw material inputs that are coming in, the production volumes, and considering the conversion factors, as well as the sales that are made of certified product, and any balance of stock that is remaining on stock at the site. So this allows the auditor to verify certified claims being made or fully supported by the available certified material. Thus, it becomes more important when we look at the refinery, because we're going to explore that mass balance model at the refinery. Where certified and non-certified material are mixed, but the company can track how much certified material is available and how much product can be legitimately sold. So the purpose of the reconciliation is really to maintain the integrity of the claim. The company needs to demonstrate certified volumes are sold supported by certified materials purchased after accounting for the processing yields and losses. And on the next slide, then we're going to follow that crude oil that was produced, which is purchased by an oil refinery. And of course, the oil refinery is purchasing the crude oil on the basis of a segregated chain of custody model. So the documentation and the exchange of that sale would support the fact that it's been purchased under that segregated chain of custody. So here we see on the next slide then the refinery. So the refinery is going to be transforming the product from crude oil into refined soybean oil and soy lecithin. So those are the two outputs. But our refinery needs that operational flexibility. So they need to be able to support their customers with the quantity of product. And that means then that they have selected to operate under a mass balance model. So as we learned from Emese earlier, just to recap, mass balance allows certified and non-certified materials to be mixed while ensuring that certified sales never exceed the certified input share. The refinery can therefore support customer demand by maintaining credible traceability and volume control. And the flexibility is one of the reasons that mass balance models are widely used in complex supply chains. So if we look at the slide here now in front of us, we can see that there was 20 metric tons of certified soybean meal, soybean oil going in, plus 20 metric tons of uncertified. So that gives a total volume of 40 metric tons of crude oil going into the process. Which is then made into refined soybean oil and soy lecithin. But of course, only 50% of the total volume produced can be sold as certified product. So the refinery processes 40,000 metric tons of crude oil, of which 20 metric tons was certified, so 50% of the share. Up to 50% of the refined outputs can be designated as certified. And then the mass balance ensures transparency, prevents overclaiming, and supports the chain of custody. So unlike the crushing plant, this refinery operates a mass balance model. Operationally, it gives that flexibility. However, even though mixing is allowed, the sustainability claim does remain tightly controlled. So the refinery, from an audit perspective, needs to be able to track how much certified crude oil was purchased, how much non-certified oil entered the process, the conversion factors that were used during refining, and how much certified refined oil and lecithin can be legitimately sold, and also trace the sale of that material as well. So for the example, if the certified material represents 50% of the total crude oil input, then only 50% of the resulting outputs can ultimately be sold under the certified mass balance model. And this is where the volume reconciliation becomes critically important. So the refinery needs to keep accurate records covering the incoming materials, the production yields, the conversion factors that were applied, the sales of that product, where that product went, and any remaining stock that is in balance. And during the audit, the certification body is going to look at those calculations, the transaction records, and ensure that certified claims are fully supported and mathematically justified. So in addition to the requirements that need to be demonstrated for the uncertified materials used, and just reiterating what Emese said, still need to be able to explain where the origin of the uncertified materials and non-certified materials comes from, make sure that that's compliant in terms of non-GMO principles, compliant in terms of pesticides, and also deforestation and forced labour and child labour free as well. So the objective is to provide operational flexibility while still maintaining credible traceability, protecting the integrity of sustainability claims throughout the supply chain. And products may be purchased by further processors or by traders. What we're going to do next is we're going to explore the trading aspect of it. So just moving on to the next slide. So traders, so at this point then, the responsibility for maintaining the integrity of the chain of custody model moves to the trader. The traders themselves would be certified against the level 2 requirements of the standard. So those are the requirements for transport, storage, traders and dealers. The traders must clearly understand the certification status of the supplier. So they need to know who they're buying from, and check that they're buying from a certified source, and check their certificate as well, and understand that the product and the chain of custody model for the product that they're purchasing. the chain of custody model that's been applied to the product, and the controls that are required to maintain the status through storage, through transport, through sales, and through any other further processing as well. So, for example, if the trader purchases the segregated soybean meal from Ronaldo's crushing plant, the segregated claim can continue to be maintained, provided the integrity of the material is preserved. So that means that it's not mixed. If the trader purchases the refined soybean oil or soybean lecithin that's been purchased under the mass balance model, then only the mass balance claim can continue downstream. Where the trader purchases the same product, so it might purchase, say, for example, soy lecithin from multiple different sources, then they have to understand the chain of custody model from the supplier, because there could be segregated soy lecithin or it could be mass balance. And it's really, really important to understand that, so that the chain of custody model can be maintained, or where mixing is undertaken, then that communicates the new model to the purchaser of the certified material. And it's not unusual that traders do organise further processing of products. So they may be using service providers or toll manufacturers. And where they do that, that commissioning, then those service providers also need to be included within the certification if they're not certified in their own right. So the trader here then is responsible for maintaining the traceability, for reconciling the certified volumes, and ensuring certified claims remain accurate. The toll manufacturer is not certified in their own right. As I said, they need to be included as a core supplier, and the certification body may audit those service providers to ensure that they have the traceability systems, the segregation systems, GMO management, and input and output reconciliation records. So this presentation is focusing on the requirement for traceability and chain of custody, but of course all of the other requirements that are applicable to that stage in the process are also applicable as well. So thinking about the chain of custody rules as the material continues throughout the supply chain, clear communication for applicable chain of custody model becomes critically important. Organisations might be managing different chain of custody models for different products. However, it's only possible to move from that higher level of control to a lower level of control. So, for example, identity preserve could move to segregated, segregated could move to mass balance, but the reverse is not possible because the higher level of physical control has already been lost. And for this reason, ProTerra certificates specify the chain of custody models that an organisation is approved to operate. Traceability certificates of compliance, where they're used, would also specify the specific chain of custody model under which that product is sold and purchased. Where TCCs are not used, then it's really important that other documentation communicates this clearly. So that could be things like contracts, delivery notes, transaction documents. Where service providers are used, the trader is responsible for ensuring that service providers have the capability to maintain the integrity of the claim, i.e. segregation of the product during storage and transport. Whether further processing is being commissioned, the process must ensure that the claim remains intact or moves to mass balance, where the mixing of certified and uncertified takes place. And these principles are essential for maintaining credibility of the claims throughout the supply chain. So we're getting now to the final stage of the story. Our chocolate manufacturer, they're purchasing mass balance soy lecithin from the trader that was certified. And the chocolate manufacturer, using that soy lecithin, has to support sustainability commitments and customer expectations. So in this case, the scope of their certification is the use of ProTerra certified soy lecithin in the manufacture of chocolate. So the chocolate being the final product that is enjoyed by the consumer, or it could be chocolate that is going on to further processors who are perhaps using it in other yummy products like cakes or ice cream inclusions. The chocolate manufacturer's ProTerra certificate would communicate that the chain of custody model was mass balance and that the soy lecithin purchased was certified soy lecithin. So even at this stage, the businesses still can demonstrate traceability, recipe control. So where does that soy lecithin go into to which recipes, and also volume reconciliation as well. So on to the next slide, and just sort of pulling it all together from a volume perspective on the journey that we've gone on. We started out with 100,000 metric tons that was crushed by Ronaldo's newly certified plants. Each actor in the supply chain has a responsibility to uphold the chain of custody models and ensure that there is clear communication and accurate controls in place. So we have produced 75,000 metric tons of soybean meal, which went into aquafeed, 5,000 metric tons of hulls, which went into cattle feed, and Ronaldo's plant also produced 20,000 metric tons of crude soybean oil, which we see then went into the refinery, with the refinery swapping to a mass balance model, mixing certified material with uncertified material, but in a controlled way, understanding that the requirements of the standard were still met, and producing out of that soybean oil, perhaps used in food manufacture or feed manufacture, and soy lecithin, which we saw went on to be used in the chocolate manufacture. So that just, shows the different chain of custody models that were used, and how the product flowed through the different actors in the supply chain. So as Emese mentioned, and I'll just reiterate it to support with a more detailed understanding, ProTerra have published today some additional guidance that supports the different models and the implementation of different models, and also the demonstration and compliance to the different models. I would encourage use of that document. It's an excellent document supporting both the ProTerra version 5 certification standard and also the MRV verification standard as well. Finally, just to sort of recap here, once the product has moved on throughout the supply chain, all we've got left is the documentation. So from a due diligence perspective and a claim perspective, it's really, really important that documentation at each step of the supply chain really demonstrates very clearly how certified products were identified, handled, and the claims that went forward. So input and output records need to reflect the chain of custody model in use, and at all stages the auditor will review whether certified claims made on invoices, delivery notes, transaction documents are fully supported by the traceability and the chain of custody model in use. So it's especially important because inaccurate claims can lead to significant commercial, legal, and reputational risk as well. So strong documentation controls help to ensure the integrity of sustainability claims throughout the supply chain. So this slide, again, just a more kind of pictorial representation of the journey that we've come on this afternoon. So we can see the full supply chain, the soybeans entering Ronaldo's crushing plant. They're transformed into multiple product streams, each of those with different downstream industries. So soybeans and hulls moving into animal feed and aquaculture feed. The soybean crude oil moves into refining, where refined oil and lecithin are produced. Materials move through refiners, traders, manufacturers, and all have responsibility for maintaining the applicable chain of custody model, which transfers from one organisation to the next. So at every stage, businesses need to maintain communication, accurate records, volume reconciliation, and traceability controls. And the integrity of the sustainability claim does depend on each participant in the supply chain understanding and maintaining their responsibilities. So why is it important? Just on to the next slide. For many businesses, sustainability has moved from being a voluntary initiative to a commercial expectation. Customers increasingly expect the evidence behind those sustainability claims, not just customers, but also legal requirements now, and being able to demonstrate the integrity of them. Retailers and manufacturers want confidence in the origin of the materials. New regulations that are coming in around EUDR, increasing expectations around due diligence and supply chain visibility. And organisations can demonstrate credible traceability, robust chain of custody systems are much better positioned then to be able to access sustainability focused markets, reduce supply chain risks, strengthen customer confidence and product brand reputation. And ultimately, as we said at the beginning, then certification is not just about compliance, but it's becoming a business tool that helps organisations compete in increasingly transparent global markets. So throughout this webinar, we followed Ronaldo's journey as the company worked to implement a credible and practical certified supply chain. And what began as a customer requirement ultimately became a much broader operational and commercial transformation. From farms and collectors through crushing, refining, trading, manufacturing, each participant in the supply chain is providing a pivotal role in protecting the integrity of the sustainability claim. And this is why robust chain of custody systems matter. They help businesses move beyond promises and demonstrate real value and verify accountability throughout the supply chain. And as FoodChain ID, we help organisations build confidence in those systems, supporting transparency, compliance and trust from origin to the consumer.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. Lovely. I think it really contained a lot of information, a lot of practical information. Feel free to re-listen to the recording because there's a lot that has been exclaimed on the evidences, the steps throughout the supply chain, how complex it is, how many things have to be considered and verified throughout the supply chain and the product's journey that we can enjoy at the end. In this example, the chocolate. So thank you, Emma, so much for explaining that. Which takes us to the last minute of the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone who have also answered the questions in the chat in the meantime. I would just like to react to one of them. Add to Emiliano was asking about the new legislation of gene edited crops. Exactly, there is in the EU level, but also in other countries, new legislation around NGTs, the new genomic technologies. And as it is today, this may change very rapidly, but as it is today, there is no possibility of analyzing. So also in this case, as labeling if for certain categories will not be obligatory, in order to make claims, you do need to have transparency and traceability throughout the supply chain to make sure what kind of crops and seed has been used and how that journey went on in the supply chain. So also, as in many cases, as we mentioned, for GMOs, NGTs, social or others, legal compliance, reputational risk, everywhere key and more is going to be crucial element is traceability within the supply chain. As mentioned, the recording and the slides will be shared after the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we will definitely keep this conversation ongoing. So feel free to reach out to us as well anytime. And if you have any questions also later on, just, yeah, feel free to send us via the contact form or info@proterra.org. Thank you very much. Have a lovely rest of the week and yeah, stay safe. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.